So I say in two places in the commentary, if there was a letter of Paul that James could be responding to, I don't believe that's what he's doing. I think he's responding to what he's heard about what's going on in these churches after Paul's arrest. But if you were to pick one letter of Paul's which exemplifies the sort of thing that James seems to be reacting against, it would be Galatians. Okay. And you go back and you think about Galatians. Paul is very waspish about James and Peter and John, those three pillars, says Paul, and he's very grumbling. He can't deny that that's what they are. But at the same time, you can see he's had some tension with them. And he definitely, in chapter 2 of Galatians, he's had some tension with James and people who've come down from James. And he's even irritated with Peter and Barnabas, if you remember all that, all that kind of thing. We never get Peter's side of the story, by the way. Paul just lights into Peter, and it would be nice to know how Peter was thinking about this. Well, wait a minute, Paul was a real bastard. I mean, he came in here like, gangbusters, but we don't get that side of it. We just get Paul's. But if you think about it, what does Paul do in that letter? If anybody preaches a different gospel than the one we preach, let him be anathema. And I say it again to you, even if an angel from heaven comes, let him be anathema. Curse, curse, curse. Those people who are teaching that you should be circumcised. No, obviously Paul has a point. He's right. He's angry for a reason. But he's saying, I wish these people who were telling you that you need circumcision, I wish they'd go and lop the whole damn thing off. Okay? That's Paul is irate. He's really steamed up about it. Now you take someone like James, all right, and if you look in my introduction, I give some both canonical and extra canonical descriptions of what we know about James. He's very, very pious. From the Gospel of the Hebrews, an Aramaic text, there's a suggestion there that he may have been a follower of John the Baptist, which might have been why he wasn't entirely sure about following Jesus. Brotherly feelings there going on. Would you follow your brother? Anywhere? No. I don't even follow mine. But no, seriously, you have James. He may have been a follower of the Baptist. His asceticism, as it's described by the early church historian Eusebius, is strict as John the Baptist's was. He becomes obviously very close to Jesus and a follower of Jesus. And there's a suggestion in this Gospel of the Hebrews that James may very well have been there and following John the Baptist even before Jesus, because in that text it says that his family was urging Jesus to go and be baptized by John. Now, if that's an actual historical memory of the church, that's a very interesting statement. So to get back to the Paul James thing, James, who Eusebius describes as having been righteous from the day he was born, okay, so he's held in very high regard before 62. And before 71, before the destruction of Jerusalem. James of Jerusalem is perhaps the most influential figure in the earliest century of the church. More important in many ways than Peter and Paul were at that point. And you get this literally during the first 3 or so centuries of the church. If you read obscure stuff like the Clementine recognitions and things like this, you find just he's regarded as being almost the Pope in some way. He's got this kind of clout.
It would explain why the Didache is so moralistic too.
The Didache the Didache is written probably in Antioch. It's a Syrian text. Certainly James would have been comfortable with that kind of thinking. Now here you got Paul on the one hand. He's cursing people. Let him be anathema.
He does some blessing too, though.
Now, he does some blessing too, but this is a problem for James. He blesses and curses, right? Out of the same mouth. Now, you take it a little bit further than that. Paul is under arrest. Paul is out of the picture. And let's say you have these zealous people who have been disciples of Paul, learning the ropes of how to be good missionaries.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Paul is even upset in prison when he writes some of his prison letters. He's not happy with what some of his followers are doing. Paul is just as moralistic as James is, if you read Paul very closely. The second half of almost all his epistles are this is how you're to live, folks. All right. That aside, the distortion of Paul's teaching, which James is hitting on, is this: faith without works is dead, and therefore it's okay for you rich Christians to mistreat the poorer Christians. This is what James is hitting on. And you teachers feel perfectly free to curse and to bless coming from the same mouth. And this is clearly against what Jesus taught you to do. And I would not hesitate to say Paul was in the wrong to say anathema. And I'll tell you why in a second. James early on recognizes the trajectory that can go in. Okay, he takes a look at what Paul's doing, and he takes a look at what Paul's followers are doing. Teachers who are probably condemning anybody who don't believe the gospel that they're preaching the way that they say, the way that they're teaching it.
Mm-hmm.
And when you look to somebody you admire greatly, I can see this with some of my brother's most ardent fans. They sometimes try to be him. Let me speak like him, walk and talk like him. Well, Paul, and you hear this today, by the way, you'll always hear Paul being defended when if you say he anathematized people, well, that's okay. It was for the sake of the gospel. So Paul was in the right. Well, Jesus said not to do that. Well, it's still the Bible. It's God's word. And Paul did it. And therefore it's God saying, let them be anathema. James isn't buying that kind of thing. And this is why James is a great corrective to Paul. There's a lot of reasons things end up in the canon, but I think the reason James is in the canon is to keep us or help us to recognize, as great as Paul is, and I love Paul, don't get me wrong here, we need James to say, wait a minute, put on the brakes. You can't speak like that. Jesus said you're not to treat your enemies this way. Paul treats his enemies this way. Now, who do we follow?
So you're saying James is like the straw that holds Paul in the manger?
Yes, he's yes, exactly. He's the guy. If you think and look at him in Acts, he does this in Acts, and 2 or 3 times. Mm-hmm. He's the guy who's holding it together. That's why he's so great.